We are living in unprecedented times. No matter what industry you come from, we must all review, rethink, and reinvent ourselves. Are you an entrepreneur that is trying to adapt your business to the new norm? Well, you are listening to the 2020 Entrepreneur, a podcast that will motivate you and have you think outside of the box. My name is Hugo Almeida, and with over 30 years of being an entrepreneur, I am here to share and inspire you with my experiences and help invent a new you. Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to a new episode of T20E World. This is Hugo here, and today I'm actually coming live to you from Battery Park in New York City. And I am excited to be here today because I have a very special guest with me, Wilson Kriegel. Wilson, say hello.
Good to be here.
Thank you so much, and it really is an honor and a pleasure. I'm humbled to be here with you, and today our topic is going to be talking about principles of consistency. Why is this so important? Because in anything you do in life, in business, entrepreneurship, whatever it may be, consistency is one of the key elements of success. Again, keep it in mind, not only in your life, but in your profession. So today, it's interesting. I'm going to talk to Wilson. We're going to chat a little bit about who he is, a father, an adventurer, an elite athlete, and an amazing entrepreneur. Very interesting how we met. He is the CEO and founder of Robin. Now, most people know I love the mountain bike out in the woods. This is the greatest piece of equipment, and everybody knows I'm a tech geek. So between my friend Willie Gavilanes, we came up in the tech world through Lucent and Avaya. He brought this vest over to me, and he said, dude, you got to try this out. Bluetooth, you could ride in the woods. You could still hear the ambience around you, the environment, anything that's coming out in front of you while still riding and listening to your music. It enables you to communicate. So I reached out to Wilson through the internet because I just wanted to tell him what a hell of a product they put out there. And that's how we met. Again, I stepped outside of the bubble, stepped outside of that comfort zone. And I felt like, you know what? Why not reach out to the CEO and founder? And that's how we met. Believe it or not, to my audience out there, this is the first time we are face to face.
That's right.
During COVID also. And, you know, it's been a little crazy, but we've kept in touch since the end of last year. And I've watched his daily activities on Instagram and he as well on mine. So, Wilson, talk to us a little bit about you.
Well, I was actually born in France, and I immigrated here at 16.
Wow.
Started in construction, so an unusual path to where I am today in my life, and then ultimately found myself going to college and playing D1 sports, which was really a catalyst in a wide range of varieties of what made me successful in life. Find myself to go to Wall Street in the late 90s, which was fairly kind of the common path to take. Luckily for me, I was actually pretty bad at it. There was, numerous crises along the way. In the 98 crisis, the Asia crisis, and then the 2001 September 11, as well as, and then recycled myself, if you could say so, into being an entrepreneur and starting to build gaming companies. And ultimately, over the past 20 years, I've been a part of building 7 different startups that were all funded, 5 of which have sold, including, currently in the process of selling Robin.
Yep.
Only one ended up failing, and one is a unicorn. So batting average slightly higher than the average, and 80% success rate versus 80% failure rate. But I guess I was very consistent that way.
I think that's fascinating. So awesome. Listen, I know that most of your startups, and we're going to dig into this a little bit more about your life and everything, but a lot of it startups, and especially in the software world and some of the gaming companies you had and some of the apps that you created, they require funding and VC. I mean, that's a world in its own, and I understand that's probably an episode alone. But talk to us briefly, how complex is it to get into that world?
I think one of the most essential aspects of funding goes back to networking. And so there's 2 kind of critical areas in funding. One is access, and the other one is viability of a product. And so, you can have access to friends and family who have money. You can have access to rich people who have money. You can have access to who are venture capitalists or private equity guys who do this for a living. But ultimately what it comes down to is that you have, and you and your co-founder or whatever the team is, in principle, you have enough vision and drive to be able to show up at somebody's door and be willing to gamble with their money and convince them, whatever they are in the stack of being willing to give you money, whether they're professionals or not, to take a risk with you, to commit with you to the idea that you can build something that will create value for them, and that you have certain levels of skills, expertise, motivation, willingness to commit to a relentless process of failure and successes along the way to create yield. And in principle, that is all you're doing. You're using capital to create an asset value that creates yield for somebody else's capital.
Absolutely.
And in the process, hopefully making money. It's only complex from the standpoint of yes, there's a lot of, terms and terminologies around the process of fundraising, but really it comes down to it's a human exchange. People invest in you as a human being. The term sheets are just technicalities.
Sure.
At the end of the day, whether it's your parents who decide to pay for your education, that's where the investment starts. So you start learning very early that there's an exchange to be made between people who believe in you and how they support you in that belief, and your obligation and responsibility against that to commit to the work to which they invested against you for, and then deliver value for that for yourself and whoever supported you in that process. And so really it comes down to, can you convince people that they should trust you with the vision that you have, and that they should support you, and that you show the attitude, the demeanor, and the relentless commitment to that obligation that you made with them. And so the complexity is whether or not you're good enough to sell that. That is really the only complexity, is can you make people believe, and that are you worth their money?
Yeah.
Everything else after that are more technicalities, like do you have the good term sheet? What equity are they getting? Do you have voting rights? And yes, sure, that takes practice, and that takes a lawyer, and that takes a little bit of exposure, and doing it a couple of times for you. People will make a lot of mistakes in doing that, and there's not enough coaching around how to set yourself up to have the right terms in these relationships. But more than anything else, early on, it comes down to people investing in people the same way that people start trusting you to want to work for you and take a risk in terms of getting a pay cut.
Absolutely.
Or working for sweat equity, as it's known to be said. It just comes down to, can you make people believe in you? And do they want to take a risk with you? And so to have that happen, then beyond that, you have to show that you're able to execute, which is most critical to them believing that you should give you the money. And the second is, do you have a network that gives you access to people who have money?
Yeah.
And so those two things could start very early on in life, right? The ability to communicate your vision, to showcase that you are hardworking, to showcase that you understand the process of execution, the process of getting outcomes, and only really just solving problems. You're solving your problems to why you
trying to
came
figure
up.
it out.
Yeah, you
That's
came
right.
up with an idea to solve the problem, and then pretty much every day you're solving problems trying to get there. So people have to believe in that, and it's almost that simple.
Yeah.
But people don't work enough at developing the skill sets that shows that they have the fundamental to actually be able to prove that.
Yeah.
And somebody has to be convinced that you can do that with their money.
That's fascinating. Good information, too. Thank you for sharing that. Now, one of the things for our listeners, and we're going to dive into this, and you'll understand why this topic is so important, the principles of consistency. And a lot of people don't really know. If you meet Wilson here, I mean, he's just a stand-up guy, and no one knows really about his entire career, where it began, and what got him to here. I always talk in life and business, entrepreneurship, about the roller coaster ride. Everybody's familiar with my terms, and when I always refer to that massive roller coaster ride, the ups, the downs, right? And that's just life. That's kind of what I try to prepare everybody out there for. But one of the things that was fascinating to me is when I learned about Wilson early on in his life, dealing with mental health issues as a young boy. And now listen, it's such a topic of importance because today, thank goodness, we're all much more aware of mental health issues, right? There's nothing wrong, and there's ways of dealing with it. And Wilson, it amazed me that, you dealt with this, you confronted this head on, and yet no medicine. You just did this. Somehow you figured this out, what worked for you the best. I just wanted you to share just a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would say of all the things that I've achieved, whether I'm a wealth of 1% or 1% athlete, or consider myself most importantly to be a great dad, my greatest success is ultimately how I've managed to deal with my mental health issues and the impacts it's had on my IQ and my physical abilities. I actually started experiencing depression at the age of 11, and I was suicidal by the time I was 12.
Unbelievable.
I had some traumatic experiences. Prior to that, I was also separated from my mother by the age of 7, taken halfway around the world. And I was a very actually gentle, emotionally sensitive, introverted child. Very emotionally attached to my mother as kind of my self-confidence and my sense of identity. And then ultimately through that trauma, I most likely have tendencies, biological tendencies, as well as personality trait tendencies that led me to be chronically depressive as well as medically depressive ultimately as I was diagnosed. And those are slightly different because medical depression is diagnosed when you no longer experience any emotion. And that takes away stamina, that takes away drive, that takes away passion, that takes away your ability to experience life and interact with other people. Chronic emotional depression is the highs and lows of, just sadness and anxiety and stress and nightmares. I actually developed and still work on this day on sleep trauma. And I started developing that at the age of 7 or 8 years old. And that carried me for over 20 plus years and 25 years of my life, which is actually in a way worse than depression itself because it's not one that you can control. And so I actually never ended up having proper sleeping patterns as well as REM sleeps, which is much more detrimental to your brain itself biologically than just chronic or medical depression. But I I then, lived with that. And this was an era where there's no YouTube,
No,
right? Where
yeah.
your parents
Yeah, when you
just think you're emotional, or you're too sensitive, or you just need to toughen up. And I had a father whose upbringing was very challenging and difficult, and tough love centric and very nature centric versus nurture.
Yes.
And he applied that to his kids. And so I didn't necessarily have a structured environment. Neither of my parents got high education. My father never went to high school or college. So the structures themselves to support you educationally or emotionally weren't necessarily there, even though I have the most amazing, loving, cherishing mother, who I'm very close to this day and take care of. But I didn't understand the fundamental issues that I had until I was in my early 20s.
Sure.
I just thought I was very emotional, very sad. I probably spent 80-90% of my year on an average basis being sad, crying, feeling emotional and physical pain. Emotional pain drives to physical pain.
Sure.
And so that was just life as I knew it. I did not know anything else. That being said, I always had very passionate, driven parents, very independent parents, very identity-driven parents. And so, I had experienced passion and drive, and I'd seen that in my father is a very independently successful entrepreneur, and my mother is a very passionate woman. And so I had understanding of the ability to experience things in very unique ways, very, very high highs, very low lows, very extremes of poverty, very extremes of wealth. And so it wasn't until my early 20s, I started seeing a psychologist. They only diagnosed me with learning disabilities. I had failed already 3 years of school by that point. So I actually failed out of high school, kicked out of public school, which is one of the reasons why I immigrated to America from France at that point, because the schooling system no longer supported me. And so I would have had gone to a specialized school to be able to get back or stay in the schooling system in France. And when I came to America, I was exposed to a world of productivity. Even in high school, you've got teams, you got sports teams, you've got different, the schooling, educational is different. So I had dyslexia. So in France, it's a very heavy writing, reading intensive environment. In America, it's much more of a multiple choice question environment. And they teach differently for productivity much more than intellectual capital. And so you're not really taught for knowledge per se as much as tools in America. Same way they train you in sports. And so sports started becoming really critical to creating a sense of identity, a sense of self, a sense of purpose, a sense of recognition, the varsity letters, the jacket, all these things, right? But those don't exist in France and Europe. And so you don't have outlets. If you're stuck in the corner in France in the system, there's no outlets, there's no other venues or channels to take. So I always say coming to America was the best, smartest decision I ever made in my life, and it saved my life. I was suicidal probably until my mid-20s, until 2000, which was my last consideration of committing suicide after September 11, which I was actually there for that. But what happened is in my early 20s, I was diagnosed as being nearly retarded when I took an IQ test, where I think I scored about 73 or 74. I think between 70 and 75 is borderline retardation. Yeah. And the doctor, the psychiatrist, and the doctors were like, well, we know you're not, this is not the issue at hand. Your emotional issues are your issues, the way your brain processes information, questions. And then they said, have you ever thought about living differently? And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, yeah, you don't have to experience life this way. You can take medication. And I was like, well, wait, I don't have, this doesn't have to be my life. And they were like, no, it doesn't, And then they leaned towards medication, which is fairly standard practice in psychiatrists and in American practices. But I didn't want to take medication. I was really kind of against medication, not vaccines, but just against pharma. For mental health, I was very scared of it. I didn't understand it. I didn't know who I would be if I took it. I didn't know what would come thereafter. But the simple question of this doesn't have to be your life, you could live differently, was a trigger for me. And from that moment on, I didn't just try to pretend that I was happy during the day, or I didn't just, you create facades, you make up personas to live with other people so you don't seem like a freak. Because nobody relates to you, your parents don't understand you, you live in a little bit of a bubble, you're kind of constantly trying to get your head above the water because you feel like you're drowning every day within your emotions, within the neurosis that you have of sadness and anger or fear. And I said, okay, well, I want to solve this. If this doesn't have to be me, and this isn't actually me, it's just the way I'm living, the way I'm processing information, that's the way my brain is computing things, why can I rewire my brain? Why can I not control the way I process information, emotions in particular? I actually, around that time, started reading a lot more about Buddhism and different kinds of successful entrepreneurs and mindsets. And I realized, we are reacting to things all day long and reacting to our environment, our emotions. And so if you can start creating a delay in how you experience emotion, how you process emotions, you create a stopgap to how you are able to then react to your environment, to yourself. And what I ultimately did is I learned to compartmentalize everything in my life. And also I learned to develop personas that allow me to pursue experiences and actions and productivity. And I actually beat depression through action and productivity, and created identity for myself, and found self-confidence, and found, friendships, and found, working environments. And through these identities, I had a party, social life identity. I had my friends friends, I had my dating life, I had the athlete, and so I actually, I had the working person who at that time was known to be quite a bit of an asshole and a jerk because I had a huge chip on my shoulder and I was less educated and I was not as smart as everybody else, and I had to compete with very smart people. And so, to bully yourself around, one of the ways to kind of make up for the insecurities that you have. But realistically, the two things that I did is I found a way to feel productive throughout my days. And I forced myself into processes on a constant basis and started hyper engaging into, okay, I'm going to promote and party 4 times a week. I'm going to work out an hour and a half every day. I'm going to work out 10 hours a day. There was no room for my emotions, and I became relentless. And then some people, including investors of mine and people who know me for a long time, said that I'm the most relentless person they've ever met. And I always say there's relentless consistency with purpose, and that's what's driven my whole life. Relentless consistency with purpose. And my purpose at that time was to build the life that I wanted, was to build the identity that I wanted, was to become the person I wanted to be. But what really differentiated my process was finding personas, compartmentalizing my emotions, and applying my energy, my emotions, to things that had yield versus just drowning within the experience of emotions themselves. And those principles of compartmentalizing, which meant I could allocate my emotions, which is energy, into things that I could measurably output, that made me feel empowered. And doing that for each of these different personas then allowed me to find myself into who I really was, what I really wanted to achieve, where my strengths and weaknesses were, and to also become hyperactive in the world of, very competitive environments, whether it was sports or whether it was work, whether it was the nightlife, hanging out with celebrities. I could be anybody I wanted to be. And that overwhelmed and overrode the original operating system that I had in my mind, which was my brain just controlling everything and the chaos I was experiencing and drowning experience of being depressed at all times.
Amazing. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing this, Wilson. It's interesting what you said, because people just listen sometimes, and when I share information and they're trying to figure out, listen, you do so much. How do you deal with all the stresses? How do you handle everything at once? The only way I ever explained it to anybody was I don't overwhelm myself. I've always envisioned a hallway of filing cabinets. It's the only way I could explain it. And when I work, I have many drawers that are open. And if you open the drawers, I've got folders that are all opened with a lot of sheets, a lot of paperwork, a lot of information. And those folders are the things I'm working with. But when I need to hop onto another topic, I tend to close the folder, close the drawer, open up the next drawer in the cabinet. It's the only way I can kind of explain. And that's the only way I can handle, and I have handled, the stresses in my life, deaths in my family, the ups and downs of corporate America, and as well as starting, different companies.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's the only way that I've been able to stay focused. So it's interesting what I'm just listening to you.
Yeah, and the reality is, oddly enough, the chaos of my youth, as well as the challenge and the burden of my youth and the difficulty of it, prepared me for the difficulty of startups.
Sure.
The grind, the chaos. What you're doing is you're creating structure in chaos. You're creating productivity in chaos. That's what startups are. It's chaos.
Sure.
Right? On any given day, you don't know what's happening, what will happen. VCs back out their deals, employees quit. There's another competitor. The numbers that you were hoping for, they didn't come out. Like, it's chaos. And so what you're doing is you're trying to create consistency and structure in chaos for productive outputs. And, my success today, and how I live my life today, and the luxuries that I have, and the great circumstances I find myself in now, were, in the making for 25, 30 years.
Absolutely.
Right? So I started at 15, realistically, to be challenged by the system, to start working again in construction, and all that consistency of wanting to outperform, wanting to differentiate myself. But the truth is, I would not be successful without my depression. It's the challenge of having emotionally and intellectually overcome my depression that gave me the tools and the outlets to pursue things like entrepreneurship, which is very chaotic and emotionally exhausting. I lived the bottom. I was suicidal. Of course I experienced stress, I experienced anxiety. Obviously I had, sleeping disorders. So it's not like that left me. Learning to be productive in that environment, learning to do the work and the consistent work on a daily basis, and to challenge myself, allow me to be resilient enough that when things got very difficult in startups, when you get punched in the face 100 times while you're raising money. I mean, listen, I got rejected 100 times raising money from VCs before you get a yes, or, you get a lead in your investment. It's not like there's an easy path. And I learned at a young age, and I worked at Enron, and I was one of the fastest promoted guys there. And we did a spin-off called the New Power Co., which was in the consumer gas electricity.
Sure.
And we raised $800 million on the NICE, and it was a big deal in 2000. And then the market collapsed in 2001, 2002, and energy and dot-coms and telcos all got crushed. And I got crushed as well, even though I had quite a bit of paper
I remember
money.
this. Yeah.
September 11th happened, this and that. The consistency around, that moment, I ended up losing millions and millions of dollars in paper. And I was leveraged to the hill in those days. My whole sense of thinking that I had attained something, money, social life, success, that I was a golden goose, that, I had somehow earned the privilege to just have this life, even though I worked hard for it. The outputs would be consistent. I was humbled by life in that moment, where ultimately, within a very short 6 months thereafter, I basically was without a home, without
everything.
money, lost everything. And oddly enough, people are like, oh, well, I didn't apply for unemployment, which surprised a lot of people at that time. But I just never wanted to take a handout. I also never believed that I couldn't rebound. Even when it got tough, the resilience of wanting to believe in myself and what I wanted to achieve. And so I always go back to relentless, consistent purpose. Again, I still believe that I could be an entrepreneur. I still believe that I could, prove everybody wrong. The system was against me when I was a kid. My father was against me in the sense, so he didn't believe I could be anything. The teachers used to bring up to the board to use me as an example of what dumb was in front of the other students. And so the system and the environment and my family was really an anchor.
The odds were always against you.
The odds were, and at least that's how I experienced it, which didn't help with my mindset around depression. But, I woke up every day and found a purpose. I woke up every day and told myself that I could do something even while I was depressed. And when I lost a home and I lived on $10 a day for nearly 2 years.
You literally went homeless at one time.
Yeah, I ended up getting kicked out of my building where I lived, and suddenly I had no money, and I wasn't even concerned about where I was going to sleep. I was like, well, how am I going to buy food tomorrow? And even though we grew up, depending on if it was my mother, we were pretty poor. If it was my father, we were fairly well off because he became successful. Being an adult and being independent and knowing that there's nobody there to help you, and then now you don't know how you're going to buy food, is extremely difficult emotionally to cope with. But nevertheless, within a year of that, after working back at a retail store at $7.50 an hour, I launched my first startup in gaming.
Amazing.
So, I never failed on my network. I never told people what happened to me. I never went asking for money for people who were part of people who perceived me to be successful originally, because ultimately nobody cares about your problem. One of the things that you have to accept in life is that you have to be self-accountable. Nobody's there to give you a handout. Nobody's going to go in your ass. Maybe you're lucky if you have friends and family, but quite frankly, if you're depressed or you have other financial issues or you find yourself in a really rough patch, most people either don't understand how you get there, they don't understand how your mental health works, and so the support is very limited. And so you have to be self-reliant. And so I think that it is an advantage to have had struggles in your youth.
Absolutely.
Whether they're emotional, financial, parental. I grew up in the projects for a period of time. I've seen people get killed. I've seen people get beat up all the time. I used to get mugged all the time at knife points with baseball bats. And ultimately that leads you to either to be crushed by the system or to find again the desire to thrive. It's a lot of work. And it has to be consistent, because if you're not, the outcomes are never going to be very good. And so there's no easy money, there's no easy outcome, there's no cutting corners. And in today's world, I think that's an issue, because everybody sees Instagram, everybody sees YouTube, everybody thinks there's a book, there's a checklist, everything, there's a bullet line, of quotes that just gets you somewhere. But the truth is, it takes a lot of work and a lot of time, a lot of, I wouldn't call it failure, because if you're growing and you're learning through the process, they're not necessarily failure, but it takes a lot of burden and issues and challenges to overcome, emotionally in particular, because again, as you are constantly rejected or as you constantly experience things that are difficult, it's easy to quit. And quitting, the only thing you've done is quit on yourself.
Absolutely.
So I think, to learn to have the self-resilience, to be self-accountable to your own commitments of relentless, consistent purpose. And you know what? Like when you're young, maybe purpose is anger. It's a chip on your shoulder. It's just a number on a dollar sheet. When you're young, I don't think there's any wrong. I think as you get older, you cannot become what was driving you in your youth, because if not, you lose your identity and you lose your sense of value and you lose your sense of humanity in that. If you look at all the great successful people who cannot pivot away from just making a lot of money, they don't have a lot of humanity, right? They don't have a lot of real human purpose. So if you become your anger, at the end of the day, then you've lost your humanity, you've lost your sense of relating, you lost your sense of empathy. But one of the things that I've been able to do, that I think I'm very lucky to be diverse in my purposes. And so when I was younger, it was security. I wanted financial, monetary security. I didn't have that. I wanted to take care of my mom, and I was very driven by the idea that that would define me. And so I did everything I could to achieve that. And then thereafter, as I was always athletic and outdoorsy, and physical experiences where it was easier to me than intellectual challenges. I'm an extreme outdoor athlete. I hike and run a lot. I do a lot of extreme skiing. And as life gone on and I made more money, I was able to do more and more of these adventures, and experiences that opened me to the world. One of the most amazing things about entrepreneurship is that you can discover a lot of different people, culture, countries. And so I built offices in China, I built offices in Korea, I built offices in Japan. I expanded my network drastically around the world and learned a lot more cultures. And that gave me a lot of more humanity. So as I was progressing and succeeding gradually and making more money and building bigger startups, I was also achieving more in my outdoor experiences. And I was leveling up, if you will, in all aspects of my life. And ultimately came the time where I was ready to be a father, and I had the partner in my life that I wanted to do that with. And I had the full purpose that I could commit to for the rest of my life.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
And that I was able to bring that into my life. And everything didn't come at once. There's a constant gradual progression, and you're moving the ball forward like you would on the football field. I always say, building a startup, it's like building a franchise. You got to show up every day with your team at practice. Practice like it's a game. Everybody's got to wear the jersey. Right? Everybody's got to commit it to the goal and the purpose that you do when you go on the field every day. Everybody's got to figure out a way to work together. Whether or not you like each other is irrelevant to what the purpose and the goal is. Respect, trust in your coaches, trust in the franchise owner, and then you're gradually building your team. You're gradually recruiting other players. You're gradually getting people to come and show up because you start winning. But ultimately, every day you go in there to develop your skill sets, your technique, right, your readiness to the game. And then when you go play the game, you just play the game because that's what you spent 2 practices a day for a whole preseason. And when it's time to go do your 4x1, or your 4x4, or it's time to play on the field, like you're no longer thinking or questioning, you're executing. And I just did a calendar club running challenge, which is only a few thousand people have done it because it's a little bit out there. But basically, you run the same number of miles per day as the day of the month. So the first day you run 1 mile, the second day you run 2 miles. But when you get on day 20, you're running 20 miles. Day 21, 21 miles. Day 22 miles. So last week you're running basically 5 marathons and an ultra marathon. You're running 15 half marathons the week before. And Jesse Itzler and Colin O'Brady, who I've built a little bit of a rapport with and inspired me to do some of the crazy stuff that I do, brought me onto this challenge. And I loved it. And people were like, what? And I was like, they're like, this is the most insane thing. You run 465 miles in a month. More importantly is you're aggregating while you're increasing.
Sure.
But it all came down to executing and having a plan and being committed to that plan. There was no questioning your emotions. There was no questioning yourself. There was no pondering during the day. You just went in. You had a plan of when you ate, when you ran, how fast you ran, how many miles you ran each time that you ran, and when you took your naps. And then you had to deal with your kids and your job. And it was planned. And so the way I loved about it is that there was no thinking involved. There was pure execution. Either you were ready or you weren't ready to do it, right? Either you were committed or you were not committed. And if you weren't committed, I'm going to try to do this. No, you don't try to do it. You just say you're going to do it. And you envision the fact that you're going to get to the end of it. And you are in the moment and you take it one step at a time and you focus on that step and not like, okay, oh my God, I'm going to have to do another mile. There's another day tomorrow. You don't think about tomorrow. You got to finish today.
That's right.
And when you are present in the moment and you're committed to that moment and you realize that it's just a moment, just like life is just a moment. And you're either going to be living that moment or you're living in the past of it or in the future of it. But, you just execute in the plan. And if you have worked to create a plan that you believe in, then you take away a lot of the uncertainty, insecurity, emotional chaos, and the yield.
Amazing. And listen, we had talked about this earlier. This past weekend, I did that biathlon in the mountains. And, 2-mile trail runs up in the mountains in Morris County, then a 10-mile mountain bike ride. But I got to tell you, that last 2 miles in the mountains, I had nothing in me. And it's so easy. I mean, and believe me when I tell you out there, I was about to quit. I had that little guy on my shoulder saying, you know what, just turn around. You did pretty good today. And I just kept thinking to myself, no, persistence, it's determination, it's the consistency. I'm going to finish. I had to walk up part of that mountain. I had to hike down those hills. And the finish is the most amazing feeling of an accomplishment. And that's what I was so happy about. I didn't care if I came in last. I didn't care if I came in first. I just cared to finish. The thing is, I wanted to just give up at times.
Sure.
But you can't.
No, I agree. I think people think that because you do something which they perceive as hard, it must be easy for you. I used to run 10Ks every day. I mean, I was a fairly aggressive fitness person and runner, and I was running a lot in my early 30s. I was a national level runner, 1:18 half marathon time. And people are like, oh, it must be easy. I'm like, no, it hurt. Every day?
Every day.
Every day it hurt.
Yeah.
Like, it hurts. Like, there's nothing about it.
It's my thighs today.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask David Goggins, when he runs, a Moab 240 or whatever it is, 240 miles, and does it not hurt? He comes in second or first, it hurts. But the pain is momentary.
That's right.
The achievement and the relentlessness of driving through that process and that growth experience that you're having and the result of it, even if there's no medal at the end of it, there's the medal of what you've achieved for yourself and how that defines you as a human being, how you used your time in life. Very momentary. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make that isn't taught enough is how limited time is. And so how do you use that time? And there's 24 hours in a day, so there's a lot of time in what is really a very small amount of time, because ultimately you could die the next minute, the next hour, the next day.
Absolutely.
So there's this misconception that you have life.
So true, Wilson.
You have to have urgency. One of the things that I always had, because I always had the negativity and the pressure of my depression, every time I could have a moment of success, every time I could have a moment of joy, I had the urgency for that. I had the urgency to try to prove myself. I had the urgency to want to feel happy. I had the urgency to want to win. And so that drives you to be excited about the work. And so you got to find joy in the work. And I don't mean a job. I just mean in doing the work. You know, when you go to practice, you have to find joy in drill. You have to understand how it works within the process of your achievements and what you're trying to achieve. And so if you cannot appreciate the work, it gets very difficult in life in general. Whether it's your relationship, whether it's parenting, whether it's your job, you know, at a regular corporation, you have to find joy in the work and understand that the work is a part of the process to lead you to your goal and your purpose. And so if you look at it that way versus the definition of work as it is used in today's society, which is 9 to 5 punching in and out to make money. No, work is just life. But work is a rewarding opportunity. And so with positive energy comes opportunity. It doesn't mean you're successful. It just means that opportunity moves you forward. And you need forward progression in all that you do in life, even if you have setback. So energy, positive energy, having people who surround you that support your goals, they challenge you, but they support your ability to achieve that for yourself. And that's really critical. I don't do things, I don't want to use the term half-ass as much as without, structure, without coaching, without, the work of learning. Because if you really want to experience something, you do it with people who have the expertise. You do it with
that
people
have done it, that know it, that understand it, that can explain it.
And so you put your ego aside, you put your insecurity aside, you put your, your self-identity, and you say, you know what, like I can be around people who are smarter than me. I can be around people that can teach me things. I can be around people that can coach me. I can be around people that can inspire me. None of that brings you down. Everything lifts you up. So never look at people who are equal to you. Never look at people who are below you. And I don't mean this in people who make less or more money than you, as much as like if you want to be pulled forward, you read books about people who have made it forward. You surround yourself with people who are ahead of you. You challenge yourself with people who are better than you, and you learn from that. And you realize that only through experiences and only through growth can you ultimately achieve the purposes that you aspire to in life. And so, for the youth of today and for the entrepreneurs, it's hard. Great things are hard to achieve. I don't care if it's in sports. I don't care if it's in your family life and your personal life. Understand that it will take time. It takes a lot of work. And you are better served in having the right people around you if you're going to do that work, and having the right techniques and having the right purpose. And so the sooner you work on that and the sooner you bring yourself with the right tools, the better the outcomes are going to be. So I always look at things in relative terms of time ratio to yield. You only have so much time. So you can focus on 20 things. Yield output of that's going to be probably average at best. Or you can find areas of strength, areas of weaknesses. You can find areas that, you have the most drive for. You can find areas that, motivate you the most. And you have to think about, what gives you the highest yield. And for example, we love being parents. I know you're a very dedicated father to your kids as I am. I would say I spend 60 to 70% of my day focused on my kids today with my partner. And it's not about being married or not married. It's just saying, okay, what makes us the happiest today? Parenting our kids, being around our kids, creating an environment for our kids.
And they grow up so quick.
Yes, time.
Absolutely.
Going back to time, right? So you have a limited amount of time. The time will go by. The time in the moment is momentary. And so if you're not there to see your kids grow, if you're not there to experience your kid's life with them, not your life.
You lost it.
Yeah, you do not get that back. You can always go back and work. You can always make more money. You can always get another job. But you will not get the time that you've lost with your kids once they've grown up.
No doubt. And we have a whole episode on that as well. It's just amazing because time is that one thing in life that you just can't take back. I mean, once it's passed, that nanosecond passes, it's done. It's amazing. This conversation is, man. So we're talking about Wilson, his career, his youth, dealing with mental health issues, building a corporate America, working at Enron, having that social status of wealth, going bankrupt, going homeless. Let's briefly, let's touch upon one of your startups. Let's talk about Pixar.
Yeah, sure.
Pixar is an amazing app that many people probably know that are out there. It's probably got over 1 billion users. It's valued over $1 billion. I know you were very instrumental in the whole startup process. I know that you sold out of there, I believe. But talk to me a little bit about that app.
Yeah, we had sold to MG Pop, which did the game Draw Something to Zynga with Dan Porter. And Josh Elman at Greylock, one of the top tier VCs, maybe top 5 VCs in the Valley, pings me and says, hey, I just met this entrepreneur out of Armenia. At that time, I done a lot of startups with foreigners, Koreans, Germans, the French, and I had European descendancy. So people like to ping me when there's a European founder. And he said, I met this entrepreneur. I think this is another OMG Pop opportunity for you. I think there's a great relationship for you to be had with this guy. It's really early. They don't have any capital. They don't even have a cap table yet. And so you should meet him. And I was like, great. He's like, there's one little caveat. He's like, he's in Armenia. I was like, I'm sorry? He's like, yeah, Armenia. And however traveled I am, I had not been to Armenia or that part of the world yet. I did have to look on a map. And I said, okay. And I got on a call with the guy. And, he was already in his late 40s. He had built, a handful of small startups in the software space. A few of them had sold. They were all local European, from Armenia, all self-funded. A kind of a very traditional business model for European entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he had started building an app that was going to create tools for content. And basically his idea and his vision was we could empower 1 billion people to be creators and to express creativity. I wanted to be a cartoonist as a kid, and clearly I chose not to take that path because I didn't want to be poor and I wasn't good enough at it. But it was kind of an odd dynamic where my father paid for college, says you can't do art. That was the one caveat. I paid for your high school and your college, there's no more art. But when I came to America at 16, I had to give up my drive and my passion around the arts. And that was a trade-off that I made. But to 30 years later, meet a guy whose desire through software and now the mobile era, this was a mobile-first product to empower, and the vision, 1 billion people to create content and to be creative and express creativity was like, my goodness, like I have to, so I went to Armenia. Yeah. I spent 48 hours over there. It takes 25 hours to get to Armenia. I spent 48 hours over there with him, and we decided to work together. There was a couple of months of phone calls and exchanges, and ultimately now this is about 7 years ago, 2014, I decided to join Hovanis, and I was the first hired executive, and basically we, the cap table was set at that time, and the 498 was set at that time, and I, out of the U.S., built a San Francisco office, and we went on to see great success. Obviously, the app has over 1 billion users now.
It's crazy.
Which is, it's basically considered, the largest apps in the world for its generation. And, creators and users and people create, animation, drawings, collages, and a lot of photo editing. It's a bit like a multi-purpose software app around content creation and editing. Extremely successful. It's global. I opened offices in LA, San Francisco, and in Japan, Tokyo, and China. Now there's 650 employees, I think 600 employees in the company. And,
it's amazing. And
we have great backers like Sequoia and DCM. What was interesting about it was there was a culture dynamic. We kept engineers in Armenia. Mm-hmm. We built all the other departments, product, UX, UI, marketing, monetization, legal, corp, in the US.
Okay.
And so we were already decentralized, which is today's world. So we were way ahead of that, of the COVID era. I traveled over 1 million miles in 4 years. I would go either work out of New York on a weekly basis, work out of China 3 days a week. I never left my kids for more than 3 or 4 days in a single week in 4 years. Made it a principle that I would always put my kids to bed and always come back. And so I would go to China for 3 days. I would go to Japan and come right back. But we gradually built a business by executing, as I call it, getting on base. We were focused on a quarterly basis on trying to achieve our goals more than just selling a grand plan vision to VCs and jacking up our valuation. What that allowed us to do is to be profitable very early on and gradually migrate to our other products and services and monetization. We were in advertising, then we went into virtual currency and basically using microtransactions to buy things, and then we went into MRR, monthly recurring revenues, and then ultimately paid a subscription model for users on a monthly or yearly basis. And now the company's moving into small business as well as prosumers. It was a mobile-first product. I think Hovanis and the management team and the employees and still control 60% of the company.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
So yeah, it's a very rare use case where I think a combined $55 million of capital was raised. So if you look on a proportionate basis to all the other billion user apps out there that are consumer-centric in content space, most of them have raised hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions. And so it's a really unique situation where there's culture involved, there's international offices involved, there's international markets and growth involved. Like we were early in India. We had 55, 60 million, 100 million users in India before TikTok was there, right? Yeah. So, and then people were like, no, we don't care about India. Now people are valuing India, they're valuing China. I went to China 2 years into me being at the company and started progressively building rapport and relationships and trying to establish. We opened a national office in China.
Sure.
I hired Chinese employees, successfully so, and empowered them. And we drove growth in China. We were one of the largest foreign apps in the consumer side in China that was not banned. So we saw a lot of success, and Hovanis continued. And he and I had a rapport where I basically was chief business officer and oversaw all the operational aspects of the company, from marketing marketing to growth to hiring different departments, monetization, legal, finance. I basically headed finance departments for several years. And so again, it goes back to the accumulations of skills that I developed over all the other startups.
Absolutely.
Right? Like it was an overnight success. Pixar isn't an overnight success. My success is a 30 years in the making success. Yeah. It's just about realizing there's no end goal as much as there is an experience of life. I think when I was in banking my first year as an analyst, David Weinstein was my managing director at Sumitomo Mitsui Bank in 1998. I went to him and I said, "What would it take for you to retire?" And he said, $10 million in cash. This was 1998. So that maybe is worth $20 million now or something like that in the bank. And I said, $10 million in cash. He goes, "Yeah." And I go, and he looks at me, a little bit like why are you being demeaning? And again, I was not good at my job as an analyst. And he goes, I go, "What's your number?" I go, $310 million. I'm this 22-year-old kid who barely made it through Sumitomo Mitsui, and I'm like, $310 million. And he looks at me like, "You're such an asshole." And in my mind, it was just the idea that I was going to build $1 billion company, and I was going to own 30% because I had looked at Bill Gates and all these guys, and well, how do you get diluted down, and where do you end up? And 20 or 30% of $1 billion company was $300 million. So it wasn't the number. The number is just a reflection of the idea that I was going to build $1 billion company. I was going to be an entrepreneur. That is what I wanted to do. And during my time at Sumitomo, I spent more time day trading and writing business plans than I did actually doing anything good at my job. And ultimately, when the '98 Asia crisis took place and they started downsizing inside Sumitomo Mitsui, my boss, David, was like, "You should look for another job." And I was like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, we're not going to keep you," which led me to Enron. And so in failures and in rejection, I always found outlets for opportunities. When I got to Enron, even though I was supposed to be a trader for energy, I ended up going to the corporate strategy e-business team. Yeah. And so because I'd written all these e-commerce plans during my day job, they were like, "Oh, this guy's pretty entrepreneurial, and he has ideas around e-business and commerce, and he's very analytical and thinking about markets and dynamics, and so we should put him on the strategy team." And so I ended up in this very exclusive team of analysts that worked directly with the management of Enron and the management of the departments of Enron, EES, broadband services. I mean, the top of the crop, top 15 people of Enron. When I was like the biggest peon, I was the only non-Ivy League person they hired that year at Enron. And yet these moments of having developed skill sets and doing things slightly differently and differentiating myself allowed me to ultimately differentiate, and showcase a talent and other skills and other driving nobody else had. And so I would say this also is differentiate. If you're just another Ivy League, superstar, like there's a million of you. I mean, I don't want to be condescending. There's nothing wrong with good education.
Sure, absolutely not.
But there is something to be said about there's a reason why there's something that the stories of success come from the guy who came from the hood. That guy had to work hard to develop skill sets to overcome not only where he started, but to outperform everybody else in the end. There's a lot to be had. If you're struggling today, look at that as an advantage. If your starting point is behind somebody else's, look at that as an advantage. Because your ability to deal with chaos, your ability to deal with pain, your ability to overcome will be significant advantages and tools for you to use as you get older in the competitive world of corporate America or of a startup.
Awesome, Wilson. Oh my God. Listen, such amazing advice and just life lessons. I mean, business lessons, entrepreneurship. I wanted to thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
Greatly appreciate everything you've been sharing with us today. Wilson, before we wrap up, let me ask you something. If you were to share one bit of advice, what would that one advice be?
I go back to the original premise we talked about, which is relentlessly commit to purpose. You just have to believe in what it is that you're seeking to achieve and do the work on a daily basis. Whatever your circumstances are, doesn't matter. Your circumstances, either use them or it's an excuse. Don't make excuses. Be self-accountable. Like every day you have to look at yourself in the mirror. Nobody's going to do it for you.
That's right.
When I go run every day now, nobody's going to run for me. Nobody's going to climb a mountain for me. Nobody's going to climb the 7 summits for me. I either choose to do it or don't. You do not try to do things. You choose to do things, right? So relentlessly commit to purpose. And your purposes don't have to be 20 years ahead of the game. Don't grand vision plan things that are unachievable from day one, or you will set yourself up for failure. Try to get on base. I always say, hey, it's like scoring in baseball. If you're stealing bases, it's all good. If you punt to get to first base, it's all good. Then you got second base, third base, and you got home base. Everything isn't a home run. Life isn't a home run.
That's right.
Right. So get on base. As long as you're getting on base, as the guy who used to coach the San Francisco, the Oakland team, right? It was about getting on base. He built the whole team about getting on base. You will go further in life by getting on base, by thinking you can swing home runs all day long.
Thank you so much. Valuable advice, Wilson. And to all our listeners out there, thank you for being a follower here at T20E World. And I, once again, just want to say thank you, Wilson.
Absolutely.
Really, I'm humbled, and it's just
I'm glad we get to meet in person.
I absolutely am, and I'm excited. And this was just fantastic. It was really awesome. So to all our listeners, T20E World, this is Wilson Kriegel and Hugo, and we are checking out.